Hi, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to our Introduction to StateRAMP presentation today. Thank you for taking time to join us as we talk a little bit about how StateRAMP came to be, what is StateRAMP, and how you can get involved. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and we'll make that recording as well as the presentation available to you following the meeting today. Also, you're going to note that due to the volume of participants, your microphones are muted, but we do invite you and welcome you to ask questions using our Q&A feature, and we'll be monitoring that as we go. If you'd like for us to follow up, just be sure to include your name and contact information there, and we will be sure to follow up as well. So without further ado, we will begin. My name is Leah McGrath, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director for StateRAMP. I have been with StateRAMP since 2020 and had the opportunity to work alongside our steering committee and walk that journey as we were asking questions and as the steering committee was forming what came to be known as StateRAMP, and have been a part of StateRAMP since the beginning when we launched in early 2021. I'm excited to share with you a little bit about how things are going and what's ahead for us today. I'm also joined by my friend and colleague, Rebecca Key.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I had the honor of joining StateRAMP earlier this year and get to stand on the shoulders of these amazing folks who have created such a great tool and resource for our governments and providers to use. My background too is in state and local government, particularly with a look toward procurement. So I look at everything with those eyes first, and then try to look at what governments need. So I think with that, we'll get started on just what StateRAMP is and how we got here. So today we want to talk to you about what is StateRAMP, how did we get to where we are today, what that looks like, how does it work, what's the idea, how you can get started with StateRAMP, whether you're a provider or government entity. Then we're going to go over some frequently asked questions, those that we get most commonly, to kind of help you along the journey with getting started. And then we'll talk about next steps for you, again, whether you're coming from a government angle or from a provider direction.
Okay, so getting started with what led to StateRAMP. I had someone recently ask me, what is cybersecurity? We were sitting on a panel discussion and someone said, hey, give us a baseline. What is cybersecurity? And I paused, and after talking with some other folks too, we came to say cybersecurity really is, it's the steps that we take to keep those we want out. It's locking the doors at night. It's making sure the windows are closed when we leave the house. You turn on the alarm. You make sure those who have keys to open the door should have keys to open the door, and that they are doing it properly and they're trustworthy. And these are the same principles that we bring to keeping our cyber, our digital environments, our connected environments secure. And as we look back over the last few decades of cyber events, some of the more notable cyber events, we know that we've learned something from each one of these incidents about how criminals get in and what we can do to be smarter. The very first one that happened in the mid-1990s, the You've Got Mail, this is probably the first cyber event I recall, and it led to the genesis of applications like Norton Antivirus or McAfee. Some of you probably remember installing those with the CD-ROM on your devices, your computers, to keep them safe. What the worm virus was, for those who don't recall, it came through on your email and the subject line said, I love you. And if you opened it, it said, I love you, 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 I love you. And it loves you so much that it was going to take over your computer and shut it down and make it not usable. That is when we realized and we learned that email can be a gateway in. It can be a portal for a criminal to harm your system, harm your data. I have 3 teenage sons, and I can tell you that recently my 15-year-old was home. He'd been home alone during the day, and I got a text from a friend because she was walking by the house and he had left the door wide open. for hours. Hours and hours had gone by before anyone noticed. And I kept thinking, that's like the You've Got Mail, right? Or any one of these scenarios. If we leave the door open, we can do all the right things, but if one person leaves the door wide open, there's very little that any one of us can do to keep that criminal out. And so as we fast forward to TJ Maxx, we learned another way that that door can be left open. And at the time, in 2003 to 2007 time period, this was the largest data breach of consumer credit cards that had happened in history. And it is when we learned that not all Wi-Fi is the same, because if your Wi-Fi is not secure, it can be that open door. And this led to criminals stole over 45 million credit and debit cards. And they did it because of Wi-Fi that was not secure. Other lessons that we learned from this, kind of looking back on the report, is the findings found that there was also just a storing of too much data for too long of a period of time. These are some of the different lessons that we've learned over the time periods that have led to best practices. And we're going to talk about this later, but with such as the National Institute of Standards and Technology that really outlines best practices for keeping our data safe. In 2013, I'm sure we all remember the Target breach. These criminals were really smart because they did this during the holiday shopping season that occurs in mid to late November to mid to late December. What this breach revealed to us as we studied it later is that connected devices like our HVAC systems can also be an open door for criminals. An error in separation of credentials in this instance allowed a criminal to use an HVAC connection to essentially hop onto third-party paying software and steal reported 40 million credit and debit cards. This cost over a couple $100 million to settle for Target. In 2017, the Equifax breach taught us revealed another way that we can be at risk. Many of us were likely affected because it affected 143 million people. And this hacker got through initially a consumer complaint portal that had not been patched properly. So as Rebecca said, she's come from government. I've worked in state and local government as well. And I can tell you, I'm not sure of any government entity out there, even private sector entity these days, that doesn't have or utilize a consumer portal, a consumer complaint portal. But this was just an example of one of the ways that we are connected, right? As we continue to leverage these tools to us, we have to make sure that we're connecting to tools that are behaving properly, following those best practices. In 2020, SolarWinds really woke us up to the risk of the digital supply chain attack. It was the largest digital supply chain attack that affected more governments across the US than ever before. And followed closely by 2021, the Colonial Pipeline. This was shut down for 5 days due to good old-fashioned ransomware. Someone got in using an old login and password to the system, took it over and left a ransom note and said, we'll give it back to you if you pay. And what we saw happen as a result of that was really on display on our news, in the newspapers, videos and photos of cars for miles lined up to get gas. And we started seeing how this has the potential to affect our day-to-day life and the way that we live. And we know that government is not immune to it. That's why we're all here today, is we know that government is not immune to it. And in fact, government is probably more at risk to cyber threats that we just can't ignore. In 2011, the federal government recognized how important supplier security is when they established StateRAMP. And they established StateRAMP right around the same time of a personnel data breach at the federal government. And what they did in doing this is say, hey, if you're going to do business with the federal government and utilize a cloud solution to do so, you've got to meet our requirements and prove it by being FedRAMP authorized. To be FedRAMP authorized, providers have to have a minimum contract with the federal government. And to do business with the federal government, you've got to be FedRAMP. FedRAMP applies to federal agencies and to those providers who serve federal agencies for those specific products that are used or environments that are used. But it really left states, local governments, public education institutions sort of on their own to figure out how to verify supplier security. And that on their own status is what led to StateRAMP being founded. We know that states, local governments, educational institutions, special districts are all at risk. This is kind of a heat map. Actually, it's an older heat map from 2019, but this was very relevant at the time that StateRAMP was being formed to say, this is happening. If we were to look at a heat map today, it's even more so. This is happening. We know that cyber events are underreported, and we also know the struggles that states and local governments and educational institutions are facing in budget and bandwidth to address these challenges. Not only in budget and bandwidth, but also the limitations that we see out there and the number of cyber professionals that we know there's a shortage of, and that are available to do this work. And so this is the backdrop that really led to the steering committee meeting in 2020 to say, how can we work together? What if states and local governments and the providers who serve them came together to recognize a common method to verify cloud security, common standards to say, yep, if we meet this benchmark, if we meet these minimum standards, then that can mean there's a certification process that can be used and shared by all the governments who are leveraging that. And so these are just some of the questions that we heard asked by states and other government officials and participants when we were forming StateRAMP. And that was, hey, how do I know, right? If a government entity is going to hire a contractor, a vendor, a provider, we use those terms interchangeably, as you'll see. If I'm going to hire a vendor, how do I know they meet my minimum requirements for security? How do I know that they comply with those minimum requirements for security, not just at contract award, but throughout contract duration? And how do I even know if a cloud solution is being utilized here? These were the questions that were being asked. What we heard from the provider community was, hey, I don't want to have to go through a vetting system in every single state or local government or other government entity that I'm doing work in. So is there a way to bring this together? And that was really the journey that we walked for StateRAMP. So I'll let Rebecca tell you now, what is StateRAMP?
My pleasure. I'm so excited. I can't tell you how excited I was when this was first brought to me. I was still working in government, but at its heart, StateRAMP is a not-for-profit. So we're a 501c6 membership organization. Great, right? Okay, now what? Well, we are the bridge that brings government and vendors together when it comes to cloud security and verifying that cloud security. So what it does from a provider perspective, and governments, if you have that out on, what it does for your vendors is that there's actually value in it for you providers, for the vendors, to say, look, I don't have to go, as Leah mentioned, to every single government and go through this exact same exercise every time I go. But it's slightly different because everybody's put it together themselves. So it's this really exhausting piece, but it also puts a burden on the governments. Do you have the resources to go through that each and every time you buy a product? Do you have the resources to make sure that every one of those boxes is checked and double checked to make sure? I know from a procurement perspective, we would oftentimes go through a procurement, get all the way to the end. The vendor has spent all this time getting, working with us. And by time, I mean, if you're in government, it can be 6 months to 12 months on a good day. We would go all the way through this proposal process, the solicitation process. We get to the end, we look at a provider and we say, now we're going to see if what we've chosen is secure. That's a pretty difficult position to put ourselves in, but what's a better way? Well, StateRAMP is trying to bring that better way, and I think we've got it. What we do is we provide this opportunity for providers and vendors to say, look, here's where we're at. Here's how secure we are based on these national standards that Leah spoke to that were developed back by the federal government around 2011 to say, this is the standard. If we're doing these things, we're doing things right. And the governments can look at that, and you don't have to double check because it's been double checked, and it's been double checked by a group of people that includes government. It also provides that contract administration, which, to be honest, very few of us have the manpower and the resources to do, which is to continually stay on top of the monitoring and making sure that that software, that infrastructure, that all that cloud security is staying secure as it grows, as it develops. You know, nothing in technology is static. And so that's a really important piece that most governments just honestly don't have the resources to do for every contract in a timely manner. So StateRAMP members, a lot of times we get this sort of question of how's it going, right? Who all is involved? We've got 238 individual government members as of July 1st of this year. We also have 103 provider members. The blue dots are sort of where they're located, what states they're located. So as you can see, we're really all over the map here, which is beautiful to us because it tells us that we really do have a solution that is working for folks, and that's what we're after. So we keep a lot of this data just to make sure, sort of as feedback, to say, is it working? And what this tells us is that it's working across the United States and not just in one sector, not just in one sector of government, not just in one region of the United States, but that it's working for us across the map. And that was our goal. We also have some leading states. These 10 states announced that they would engage and adopt StateRAMP requirements into their cybersecurity audits. And that's a beautiful thing. I'm so excited that later this summer, maybe early fall, but I think later this summer, we'll be announcing more than a dozen additional states and local governments, including some education institutions that are also adopting StateRAMP into their requirements. And this government base is just growing exponentially at this point because it really is offering a solution to governments. But our provider library is growing as well. We're getting a lot of providers that say, you know, from a provider perspective, if I'm doing this anyway, this is, you know, I can't tell you how many times from a procurement perspective, I would get a vendor, a reputable, wonderful provider who's competing against other providers who comes to me and says, I know that my competitor told you they do X, but I know they don't do that. Well, if they're coming through StateRAMP, they'll know, right? We'll know. The verification and validation process is very thorough. So from a provider perspective, this is the proof that you've been looking for, this validation that says we are doing the right things, we are doing these things, and this is how you can show it to governments, because from a government perspective, we've been looking for a way to prove that. And so StateRAMP provides that sort of bridge for us to communicate and talk at the same level. And I think that because we're getting so many governments is because we're seeing that. And the reason we're getting so many providers to buy in is because we are seeing that. It really is a solution I think we've been looking for quite some time.
You know, we've heard J.R. Sloan, who is the Chief Information Officer for the state of Arizona, is also our board president. And I've heard him say, Rebecca, time and time again, this is the right solution at the right time. I do think this is the intersection where we are seeing such, there's no turning back from digital government for providing services to our constituents, but also to the team members who work for government to be able to access government digitally. There's no turning back. And so going forward, we've got to make sure that we're doing this in a secure fashion together. And we could not have done anything that we have done today without these individuals that you see on the screen. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to our board of directors and our steering committee. Most, if not all, of these individuals have been with us on this journey from day one in 2020 when we started kind of the steering committee coming together to develop StateRAMP and then launch StateRAMP in 2021. And these individuals help advise, they provide insight, direction for strategy, and also help develop the standards that lead and kind of guide our verification process. We also have 4 standing committees. I just want to mention, this really helps, I think, give insight when you think about how does StateRAMP work. These individuals right here, this is part of how StateRAMP works. As a nonprofit, we've got a governance structure. Of course, we've got our board and steering committee, but these standing committees are really important to our process, and very appreciative for the time that each one of these individuals gives. Our standards and technical committee has the responsibility for annually reviewing our security policies and requirements. Our appeals committee serves as really an adjudication board in case there's ever a disagreement between a provider and a government or the program management office. The appeals committee can serve as that adjudication board to solve that problem. Our approvals committee serves as, and it's comprised, I should say, of all government representatives. So everyone on our approvals committee represents government. And so we've got about 5 different states represented here, and our approvals committee comes together to work with our program management office to recommend a product or a provider's offering for what we call StateRAMP authorization. And so that approvals committee really reviews the PMO's work for authorization status. Every month they're reviewing different packages. And then our nominating committee has responsibility for making recommendations for board membership and committee membership and best practices in governance. And we just have phenomenal individuals that I have come to respect and appreciate so very much. So security framework, I want to talk a little bit about how the StateRAMP security verification process works. And it starts with this. It starts with our security policies. You can find these at stateramp.org/templates-resources. As I mentioned, our governance committees really come together to make recommendations to our board who adopts these policies. So our security assessment framework, our data classification tool, baseline controls, our minimum mandatory requirements for what we call StateRAMP Ready, and our continuous monitoring guide. This is all part of our StateRAMP verification process. You can see that our baseline requirements are built on NIST 853 Rev 4. That's a publication that you are, if you're not familiar with, it is a publication by the National Institute for Standards and Technology. And we are all working toward moving to their newest version, Rev 5, in 2023. Those are the same controls and framework that FedRAMP is also, those requirements are also built on. We are mapping, or we've got a goal to map these requirements directly to some other frameworks you may have heard. These are federal requirements that often flow down to local governments. And that includes, I apologize, this was cut off a little bit in the screen, but a goal to map to frameworks like CJIS, IRS, the MARSI or HIPAA, or Medicaid information systems. Those are some of the frameworks, or FERPA if you're in education, that all map really nicely to NIST 853, which is one of the reasons that framework was chosen by our steering committee to really be our foundation for the security requirements. If you go on to this website, you're also going to see lots of templates so you know exactly what is expected, and sample policies and procedures as well. So this is a great place to start if you're thinking about what is required, what does, from a security standpoint, what are the controls that are required or audits required. This is going to give you a good starting place. But how does it work? Rebecca, walk us through that.
Well, honestly, I try not to be too excited, but I can't even hide it on this part of the slides. I'm not even going to try. It's just, it blows my mind how great this is. So you guys bear with me. It's genuine. So really where it starts is with the government entity. This is up to you as a government, what your policy, what your cyber requirements, what your cloud security policies are. So when you update those to include StateRAMP, obviously your service providers, your vendors need to know about that update. We'll talk about that later. But basically, once that policy is in place, then as a provider, you just attend a Getting Started webinar and get prepared for the audit. We have teams that help you with that. That's why we want you to watch the Getting Started webinar. Our goal as a not-for-profit is to be successful. And in order to be successful, everyone has to be successful. So again, it's that bringing together of these two groups. So that's why we want you to watch that Getting Started guide and know that Getting Started webinar and know exactly what resources are there for you to walk you through this process, because our goal is for you to be successful. One of the things that's required with StateRAMP is that you have to have a third-party assessment organization to do a security audit of your product. Now we're talking about products. We don't authorize vendors, we authorize products. So a vendor may have one product, they may have a dozen products, but each product is different, and so we're authorizing products. So that 3PAO completes your audit, and then that 3PAO submits that package to StateRAMP. And we have a program management office that's going to receive that package, and they're going to do the assessment of the packet that's turned in. They're going to go through all the approvals, all that sort of thing. Once it passes that validation and it's verified that that meets all the requirements, then it's published on our authorized products list. Now, one of the great things from a government perspective, but also from a provider perspective, is that as you're going through that process, that is also shown on this authorized product list. So if you go to stateramp.org, you can see the authorized product list right there. And so you'll see different security statuses. And there's an explanation on there. We'll explain a little, but there's also an explanation on that page that tells you what that means. So as you're going through that process, as you've submitted your security package, as you're working with 3PAO, those things can be reflected on this list so that as a government, you can see that a vendor is working through it. And vendors as a vendor, the governments that you're working with can see that you've engaged and that you're working through this, because it does take some time. So this is a beautiful list. You can go out there at any time and look and see what products are on the list, which ones are authorized, which ones are ready, which ones are progressing through the process. Once these products get to this ready and authorized and provisional status, there's a continuous monitoring component. So monthly, those things are looked at and they're monitored. And so that is something that governments who participate with StateRAMP, so if you sign up as a government participating with StateRAMP, which I can help you with, once you sign up for that, we actually can work with you to allow you access to that portal to view the continuous monitoring, which we often shorten to CONMON. So if you hear us say CONMON, that's what we're talking about. So not only do we sort of tell you, but we give you access to that, of course, with the vendor's permission. And that also helps the providers, because a lot of times in these contracts, we have requirements from the government perspective that says you have to contact us within an hour, or you have to contact us within 24 hours. That's a lot if there's something going on. So we can help with that from a StateRAMP perspective to make sure that these governments know what's going on.
Absolutely. And I think that continuous monitoring is really the difference maker. As I reflect on the last few years of this process, the ability to have the continuous monitoring, you said it, Rebecca, technology is not static. And so you've got to be able to know that and share that information, because we're all in this together. How are you continuing to evolve to meet the evolving threat, right? And I think that that shift in culture or mindset to one of continuous monitoring and continuous improvement is really important and critical in cybersecurity. And what StateRAMP does is provide a framework for that to happen. The other thing I wanted to note as I was listening is that what we're starting to see out there, if I go back to this slide, as it always starts with the government entities and their policies. But one of the reasons that we built the standards based on NIST is because Most states, if not all, and government entities have adopted a cybersecurity framework based on NIST, right? And so we've seen already it happen where a provider who has a StateRAMP authorization, governments, whether they've adopted requirements into their policies or not, recognize that. So if you have a StateRAMP ready or a StateRAMP authorized status, take that to the government entities that you're working with or where you may be proposing work and let them know, because most likely that is going to be recognized and meet those requirements already. Whether it's in policy or not, that is going to demonstrate that you're meeting those requirements. So that has been an exciting kind of evolution that we've seen occur as well. So how to get started. We've mentioned membership. That's really where it begins. We've got two different membership categories, one for government and one for providers. So if you are coming to us today from a government entity, there are two different types of membership. One is our individual membership, and this is at no cost. It's available to you. You can sign up to be an individual member today if you go to stateramp.org/register. It's a very simple form. You're not committing to anything in particular other than to say, hey, I want to be involved, and you want to sign up. And by becoming an individual member, that's going to give you access to our members only portal. It's going to allow you to participate in our committees and discussions. We bring our policies to our members for the providers and the government every year to say, what do you think? What ideas do you have? What recommendations do you have? So we encourage you to become a member as an individual government member. If you are interested in being a part of this, we'd love to have you. We also have what's called a certified government membership, and these are for those government organizations who want to participate with government at that enterprise or agency level. You want to work with Rebecca, who is going to talk about kind of some of the implementation resources we have. You want to make sure that your CISO, your Chief Information Security Officer, or his or her designee has access to view that continuous monitoring reporting that's available in the secure portal. Then you want to become a certified government member. And so to become a certified government member, that first step really is just to reach out, schedule a meeting. Rebecca's email is here, and she can help facilitate that meeting, make it happen, and talk through what makes sense for you and your team. Our provider membership is $500 an annual membership fee. And that is by organization, and that allows you to bring then as many individuals as you would like to have access to our members only portal and to be a part of StateRAMP. Membership from the provider perspective also allows you to participate on our committees, to provide input and feedback. And we are in the process of working with our nominating committee to also develop a corporate council. So we invite you to become a provider member. We want your input. We'd love for you to be involved. Provider membership also gives you the ability to list your verified product, or if you're going through the process of verification, you can list that product on our authorized product list. The next steps, if you're interested in provider membership, you can register today at stateramp.org/register. But we'd also invite you to attend that Getting Started webinar. It occurs monthly. You can go to stateramp.org/events to see that, to register there. And then if you're interested in having a call with our team, email info@stateramp.org, and we're going to bring the right people to the call to have that call with you to help you through the process. We also have some Getting Started guides. We have a Getting Started guide for government and a Getting Started guide for providers. You can find that at stateramp.org, and we are also going to make sure that we email you some links to those guides when we follow up later today. We do have some provider support. As we've said, we're a nonprofit and we have a mission to encourage best practices, and we want to see providers be successful through this process. We've got a fast track program for any provider who has a product that has a FedRAMP authorization, is eligible, whether it's FedRAMP ready, ATO, JAB, agency sponsorship. You've got a fast track option for you, and we can help you through that process so that you can really leverage the work you've already done to achieve that FedRAMP authorization, to achieve a StateRAMP authorization as well. We're in the process of developing other fast track programs, so stay tuned on that. We've got, as we've mentioned on our templates and resources page, lots of different templates and resources and opportunities. Our goal is to help you identify the best pathway to success and then to provide resources to get you there. So as you are kind of looking around, if you see things or have ideas for resources that would be helpful, let us know. We're always looking for that input as well. And then I'll let Rebecca speak to some of the support we provide for our government partners.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, from a government perspective, we know how difficult it is to take on new things and to find the resources, whether it be personnel or budget. It is just, it's tight out there, and there's more and more every day. And so what we try to do is take the best practice that we're finding from all the governments who are implementing StateRAMP, from best ideas to what's working in practice. And so what we found is we have, sort of an overall implementation plan, but we also know that from a procurement standpoint, folks in the procurement office need to understand what these updated requirements are, how those are validated, so we can do targeted implementations specifically for your procurement groups, specifically for the information security group to understand, because they also need to understand, but maybe at a different level. We do have an onboarding exercise for those that are that you've designated to have access to the secure portal for that continuous monitoring and reporting. And that onboarding is actually directly with our program management office. We have a library of solicitation and contract language that we've seen folks use. And the reason for the library is because we know from a government perspective that while we're all after the same standard, sometimes the road to get there is a little different from government to government. So we can show you what others have used, and you can pick from that library what works best for you, whether that's what works best today and it might change a year from now. We know that as you update policies and as changes are made, it often looks more like a runway where you just sort of headed down that path before you take off. Most things take a little time to get there. And I think that's particularly true in government because we have so many great stakeholders, including our provider community. That vendor community is very important and they need to know what's going on. So we offer help with education and training, not only to your internal stakeholders, but to your external stakeholders, including that vendor community and providers. We don't want to leave you in the dark and then all of a sudden something has changed. That happens sometimes, but we don't want that to happen with this. We want to make sure that everyone knows what we're after, what we're doing, what is really about this validation of what's going on. And then with the reporting and communication, we can help with that so that we have just a bucket of tools to help with all of that, so that as a government, you're not in a situation where you would like to do it, but you've got 7 priorities and enough resources to do 5 of them. We can take that on. We can provide that for you. We can really work with you to set this up how you want. We even have a checklist of all the things that we think you might want to consider when you're looking at implementation, and which one of those that we can help or even take over on your behalf. So I think we do a really good job of trying really hard to be that resource externally to you to help. A lot of helpful links. We mentioned a lot of links throughout this conversation. So again, a copy of this presentation will be sent to you after, or made available to you after this event, but we wanted to make sure that we had these here so that you could find them. I'm so excited about it, and I really want you to reach out to me. So my email's first, because as a government, I really want to talk to you about what we can do for you. This is such an amazing solution. We've got the registration links as well. A lot of those documents and templates we talked about, the links for those are there. Future events. Yes, we have getting started webinars. We do have lots of events online, but we also are going to lots of conferences. We spend a lot of time speaking and getting the word out. Part of our mission is to educate, right? This is about educating folks on what is available to you, what we can do as a group to protect our citizens, to protect the world that we live in. So check out those events where we'll be if you want to hear us speak or come talk to us individually. And then one of the best ways to keep up with what's going on with StateRAMP is our blog. And so there's a link to that as well.
Thank you so much. And so as we kind of reach sort of the conclusion slides, I suppose, of our presentation today, we wanted to cover some of the commonly asked questions that we receive. So we're going to pick up the pace. We're going to go a little bit faster at answering some of these questions for you, but know that if you want to go a little deeper in any of these topics, we are an email or a phone call away, and much of this will be covered in more detail in those Getting Started webinars as well, if you're interested, especially from a provider perspective. So question one I'm going to take, and that is, why not just FedRAMP? We hear this question often from especially the government perspective. States, local governments, public education institutions, or special districts will say, why can't I just require FedRAMP and be done? And that is a great question. Here's why. Because to be FedRAMP authorized, providers must have a minimum contract for that product or environment's use by a federal agency. So if you are requiring FedRAMP, you may be inadvertently limiting the number of providers who can even respond to that solicitation, or who are eligible to provide that service. And we don't want to do that. We want to grow innovation. We want to grow the number of qualified providers for you who are out there, so that you can really take advantage of the services that are available to you, but to do so in a secure fashion. And so that is reason number one. Reason number two would be that FedRAMP only shares that continuous monitoring, reporting, and documentation to other federal agencies. And that makes sense, right? It's a federal program. And so they're sharing that information with other federal agencies or employees. If you want to be able to have access to the continuous monitoring, reporting, or that validation at your state or local or educational or special district level, then really StateRAMP is the answer for you. And so those are the two main differences. But this chart, as you see, kind of really highlights some of the similarities between StateRAMP and FedRAMP. And we've mentioned many of these already. And then also some of the ways that we're different. I will say we really, FedRAMP has been a good program, and especially in its intent, right? And so we had the opportunity, working with the steering committee, to develop StateRAMP, kind of standing on 10 years of legacy and lessons, and to take what has been the best of FedRAMP and then to really tailor that to serve the state and local government community and those providers. And so that's why you see some of these differences, to say, hey, regardless of contract status, we want you to come through StateRAMP. We want to grow the number of qualified providers who are available to you. We've got a centralized program management office, and that was really intentional and designed so that you can know that there is the consistent application of standards for every security package. So when we say something is StateRAMP ready, it is StateRAMP ready. If it's StateRAMP authorized, it is StateRAMP authorized. We've got a fast track option. We're going to be building more fast track options as we go to help those providers leverage the work they've already done to come through StateRAMP more efficiently. And so these are just some of the highlights and why we think, probably from a government perspective, we wouldn't advise you to solely rely on only FedRAMP because you don't want to limit the potential out there. I just mentioned a few statuses: StateRAMP ready, StateRAMP authorized. What is that? So here's what that is. These are our 3 milestone statuses. And you can see a little bit more about this in our Getting Started webinar, as well as on our website on the templates and resources page. But really, we've got 3 milestone statuses. If you are talking about a provider whose product has gone through the entire process and they've achieved verification, it means this. They are either StateRAMP ready, StateRAMP authorized, or StateRAMP provisional. StateRAMP ready would be that first step in the progressive, kind of the progression of statuses. StateRAMP ready means that this is a provider whose product meets the most critical controls and the minimum mandatory requirements to be ready as defined by our policies. It also means that this is a provider who's had a third-party assessing organization conduct a readiness assessment report or review, a RAR, you'll hear it called, to attest to, yes, this product meets the minimum requirements for ready. So we've got that attestation from the 3PAO, and then our PMO looks at that security package, looks at the audit, they validate and authenticate, and they say, yes, this provider's product meets the requirements for StateRAMP ready. If you have a FedRAMP ready status, you'd be eligible to leverage that fast track process to become StateRAMP ready. Authorized, this is our highest level of status. If you are authorized, then this is a product that meets all of the security requirements and controls by impact level, and has had a third-party assessing organization conduct that independent audit that says, here's the audit that kind of attests to the findings. And then the PMO is going to look at those findings, and they're going to look at the documentation, and they're going to validate and authenticate and say, yes, we verify this provider meets the requirements to be StateRAMP authorized. Now, to be StateRAMP authorized, because it is our highest level of certification, we do require either a government sponsor or a recommendation from our approvals committee to become StateRAMP authorized. And that was designed to make sure that, hey, we're doing this for government. We want to make sure that government agrees we're meeting the requirements. And so in this scenario for StateRAMP authorized, the PMO is going to do that review. They're going to do a thorough review of documentation and audit. They're going to make a recommendation and have a summary. And then either the government sponsor is going to come in and review that summary and associated artifacts and documentation, or our approvals committee that I mentioned earlier will come in and do that. And they're going to agree for recommendation of status or disagree, and we go from there. But most often, hopefully, they're going to agree for recommendation of status, and then that authorized status is awarded. So provisional is kind of in between ready and authorized, right? They meet the minimum requirements for ready, but not all the requirements for authorized. And in this case, a government sponsor can say, hey, I'm going to recommend them for provisional status. And the idea with provisional status is through continuous monitoring and through that annual audit that's required for these statuses, they're going to work toward achieving authorized status. So this is kind of that security status progression and what these milestones mean. I mentioned impact levels. This just recognizes, right, not all data is the same. Not all systems are the same. Some we want to lock down a little bit more than others. And so we've got different impact levels that allow our providers or for the governments to identify what's the appropriate impact level. Now we have a data classification tool that was developed by our committees and boards that can be used. You can find this online on our website as well. And it's about an 8-question survey that helps you identify what impact level is recommended for the type of data or system that this technology is going to support. And then lastly, for getting, the providers, this is just kind of another note on all of this information is going to be available in more detail in our Getting Started webinar. Take it from here,
Yeah,
Rebecca.
I just can't wait. I'm so excited. So from a government perspective, it's also that easy. You become a certified government member of StateRAMP. We can work with your information security office to do a targeted implementation. So basically, we can assist with the updating of policies. We can show you what other folks have done who've engaged, what their policies look like, what's recommended, and work with you to recognize StateRAMP. We can work with you to figure out who should be designated as a security officer, Well, we will coordinate a meeting with our StateRAMP PMO, and you can get access to the portal for the continuous monitoring. It's that simple. For procurement, usually the vendor communication is housed in the procurement department. So we've put it here. In a few cases, it may not be, but vendor communication is really, really important. So we work with you to help you on that. As Leah mentioned, that data classification tool that helps you understand which level this data is and where that belongs, so that you know which requirement to put in solicitations and contracts. We help you update terms and conditions. We can work with you, your counsel, whoever needs to work to update those conditions to engage and incorporate StateRAMP requirements. Again, that's simple. And to get even a little more granular, when you're actually doing a solicitation, I mean, this is it. When you're developing that solicitation, you select the impact level, the security status level, those things that Leah just spoke about. You can give them a deadline, right? We talked about the runway sort of ramping up to this. If you're just doing this and a lot of your providers haven't had a chance to get familiar with StateRAMP yet, then you can say, you don't have to have it when you bid. You can have it at the time of award, or you can have it, depending on how you're implementing this, you can have it 12 months after award, right? Then we set the continuous monitoring, because to be honest, most of us aren't doing contract administration until it comes time to renew the contract. And that's a little dangerous with these cloud contracts. So we set that up. Once you're evaluating and awarding that one step, all you have to do is confirm with StateRAMP. That's your evaluation for the security requirements. That's it. And then from the contract to contract compliance piece, contract admin, you're just doing the continuous monitoring. That's simple.
So as we look at how to begin, or what the next steps would be, we recognize that this is, there are many stakeholders involved in this decision process. And so we put together a couple of questions for you to think about. So for government, as you are talking with your colleagues about this, think about, how does StateRAMP meet your security requirements? How are you verifying your suppliers today? And does that include continuous monitoring? And how could StateRAMP help? I really do believe that we've seen StateRAMP has the potential to be that supplier risk management tool and really help be an extension of your teams and what you're trying to achieve as well. For providers, talk to your colleagues, right? Talk to your chief security officers, your compliance team, those in government affairs or business development and leadership teams, to talk about, how are you currently satisfying security requirements for your government clients? What's that going to look like in the future, right? And what challenges do you face that StateRAMP might be able to help with? As you have questions, we're going to invite you, please contact us, reach out to us. Here are those links one more time, and let us know how we can be helpful. We appreciate your time today very much. I think we've tried to answer the questions as we've gone. If you think of others, let us know. Don't hesitate to reach out to Rebecca or myself. And thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.